So the big Vladimir Putin game surrounding Ukraine on three sides. Some belief in the West, not least from Boris Johnson, that he was about to launch a mass invasion on the entirety of the country. The worst potential war since 1945 in Europe was being talked about by us and indeed by the Americans. Late last night, Russian forces moved into those two eastern Ukraine provinces. Now, when I say Russian forces moved in, all the evidence is there have been Russian forces there for the last 8 years. These are very much breakaway states, but it was the official recognition of their independence last night, prior to military vehicles moving in, that gave us a clue towards the end of my show last night as to what the next stage of this was going to be. And I suppose Putin, having put the mega threat of the total invasion of Ukraine and the potential taking of Kiev on the table in our minds, having done this, will be expecting from us a muted response. Well, what's it been? In the case of us, sanctions on 5 Russian banks and 3 high net worth individuals thought to be accomplices and associates of Vladimir Putin. In the case of Germany, perhaps a bit of a surprise, with Chancellor Scholz announcing they would be stopping the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. That did look like, actually in many ways, quite a big move. We don't yet know what the American response to this is going to be. The podium is there in the White House. We thought that President Biden would speak on this over an hour ago, but I'm afraid when it comes to Biden's press conferences, and there it is, an hour and 4 minutes after he was expected, and he's still not there. So I guess they're still thrashing out the final details. This isn't straightforward because the people that live in those two Ukrainian provinces, Donetsk and Luhansk, are overwhelmingly Russian speakers. If we held a referendum in those provinces and asked people, would they want to be part of Ukraine or part of Russia, they would say Russia, as indeed they did in Crimea. And I guess in many ways this all goes back to the breakup, the very rapid breakup of the Soviet Union, all the breakaway satellite states, and within those states there are pockets, in some cases quite large pockets, of people who still feel predominantly Russian. Vladimir Putin wants to rebuild what he sees as Greater Russia. But is this 1936 all over again? Is this, as it was with Germany in those days, taking territories that they said were basically Germanic-speaking peoples, leading to the hideous global conflagration? I don't think it is. I expect that Putin does want, if he can, to extend a bit further. Does he want an all-out war with the West? Absolutely not. There is no way that he does. Does he want global domination? There is absolutely no way that he does. And I'm not condoning the way in which he deals with opponents, the poisoning, the assassinations. I'm not condoning military vehicles moving in last night. I'm expressing an understanding of what I think Putin is all about. But my question to you, the audience, tonight is, what do you think we should do next? Let me know your views. Farage@gbnews.uk. Now let's talk about Nord Stream 2. Let's talk about commodities. Let's talk about prices. Let's talk about energy policy. Because I think Liam Halligan, GB News' economics editor, all of that has been brought into very much sharper focus today. Just explain to people what Nord Stream 2 actually is.
Well, it's well known now, because we're in the middle of this conflict, that Russia provides Western Europe with about 40% of the natural gas that we use. And that's been the case pretty much since Soviet days, and even during the Soviet Union, when the Cold War was, absolutely front and center of global events, that gas supply continued from the Soviet Union. What's happening now is that gas supply, rather than going through Ukraine, it's increasingly going from the north of Russia, near St. Petersburg, across the floor of the Baltic Sea, just underneath Sweden and Denmark, straight into Germany. So it's marginalizing Ukraine. And the fear among lots of Western analysts is that if Russia doesn't need Ukraine to have pipelines going across it, then there'll be less concern about political turmoil in Ukraine, so there might be some expansionism. Now, there are 2 Nord Stream pipelines. Just bear with me. Nord Stream 1 was completed in 2011, between Russia and Germany. It didn't open until 2015 because, again, there was a lot of political aggro. That it was pretty much nerds and commodity traders who understood it because there wasn't then a huge conflict. There'd been a conflict in 2008-9 with Georgia, but at that point, East-West tensions weren't huge. So Nord Stream 1 went through on the nod, but even that took 4 years from completion to it beginning. Nord Stream 2 is along the same route across the floor of the Baltic Sea. Again, the longest undersea gas pipeline in the world. It is complete. And what's now happened is that Germany, which helped it to be completed, is partly owned by Gazprom, the Russian state giant, and Germany and some of the other surrounding countries. Germany supported Nord Stream 2 for years, but at the very last moment, as it's about to be given the sign-off, it's been tested and pressurized.
And the Americans approved it. Biden's approved it.
The Americans have approved it, but now it's being used as a bargaining chip. It's not going to be allowed to be used. The Germans have said no for now, but it absolutely is for now. You're not going to have that massive multi-billion pound pipeline providing Russian gas to Europe, gas it desperately needs. It's not going to sit there and do nothing when there's a pipeline next to it that is working. So Nord Stream 2 will happen, but there's a lot of symbolism involved here. It's not being used for now in order for the West to try and exert some leverage. The Germans quite reluctantly, it must be said, given this conflagration between Russia and Ukraine.
And Liam, it's not just gas that we get from Russia.
Oh, no.
There's oil that we get from Russia. There's nickel that we get from Russia. There's a whole host of commodities that come from Russia. What are the implications for pricing and commodity supply if these tensions escalate further?
Well, Russia is an energy superpower. There's no getting away from it. It's also a food superpower. Russia's the world's biggest exporter of wheat. The Russians and the Ukrainians between them provide a third of the world's wheat almost, 20% of the world's corn, 80% of the world's sunflower oil. These are really important commodities that go into many products. So as things stand now, I must say, I've watched this very closely today, as I know you have. We've had many discussions about it. The sanctions that the UK's put on so far are pretty lukewarm, pretty tepid. There are individuals who don't even...
3 billionaires.
3 people that don't even live in the UK. There are 31 Russian companies listed on the London Stock Exchange. Nothing seems to be happening to them. So that's why the financial markets, the FTSE 100, has ended up today, because the sanctions could have been a lot worse. If this is the best the UK has got, then it's not very much, frankly, according to the financiers. But that doesn't mean that there won't be lower level sanctions and tit-for-tat things which will impact this cost of living crisis being felt by many GB News viewers. For instance, Nigel, little noticed, the Russians have slapped an export ban on something called potassium nitrate. Now, you're a former commodity trader. You know what potassium nitrate is. It's the basic raw material for fertiliser. That's why farming friends of mine are phoning me saying, crikey, fertiliser prices are going through the roof. It's not a joke, because when fertiliser prices go up, food becomes more expensive. We've already got a cost of living crisis in this country. We're already facing a triple whammy: higher energy bills, higher tax, higher inflation in April. If this Russia-Ukraine crisis escalates, if sanctions get tighter than they currently are, we could see even higher energy prices, petrol and diesel, and food prices too.
So a lot will depend
That's the reality.
A lot will depend on what Biden says in the next...
Indeed.
When he finally...
Well, I'm sure GB News would much prefer to hear from you particularly, and maybe me as well, than Joe Biden.
No.
But it's a serious point. We can beat our chest about sanctions, and, in many ways, sanctions are justified. There's some serious stuff going on in Donetsk and Luhansk, as you, me, and GB News colleagues have been saying all day. But as they come to actually ink in those sanctions, Western leaders will be mindful of the impact of those Russian sanctions on the cost of living crisis, on living standards in the West,
It's very real.
on people who vote, on people whose support they need.
Liam, thank you very much indeed. I'm joined now by Angela Knight, former CEO of Energy UK. Angela, good evening.
Hi.
So I wonder, and we've talked about this before, but are these tensions with Putin and Russia, and given what Liam Halligan's just said about the sheer amount of energy, in particular, that comes out of Russia to the West, does this hasten a bit of a rethink about the UK's energy policy?
Yes, it does. And not just the UK's energy policy, it's actually Europe's energy policy. I mean, the country that is most affected, Nigel, by this is, of course, Germany, who has been increasingly reliant on imports and who decided, for reasons which were local political reasons, to shut down their nuclear power stations early and, of course, have shut down their coal-fired power stations. So for Germany, they are hugely dependent on imported gas, and the fact that there are sanctions now taking place, the refusal to open Nord Stream 2, whilst I quite agree with you, there is Nord Stream 1, and by the way, there's a gas pipeline that comes through Ukraine as well. I mean, that is actually a big about turn for Germany. What one can't do, though, Nigel, is actually turn back the book and say, well, there are decisions that were made that were wrong, there were policy that had not been thought through. What they have to do now, us and Europe as well, is actually make some really firm decisions about how to become more self-sufficient, less reliant on imports. And if that means you keep your nuclear power stations running and you actually keep your coal-fired power stations running for the time being, then so be it.
Yeah, I mean, where can Germany turn next? As you say, the political movement against nuclear in the wake particularly of Fukushima, not that I thought it was that relevant, but hey, that opposition to nuclear power is huge in Germany. It's, of course, completely the opposite in France. I mean, presumably the Germans have to start mining coal again.
Well, they are mining coal right now. I read an article not so very long ago that that's exactly what they were doing, which one wonders actually what the Green Party and the very strong Green movement in Germany, and of course they are a coalition as opposed to a coalition of lots of different views, and that's why some of these policies have been made the way they are. One wonders what the Greens are thinking now, because they have one of three choices. You either keep your nuclear running, you restart your coal-fired power stations, or you get cold and you shut down some of your industry. And it is literally those three choices. Yeah. And yeah. It's come to a pretty past when the great economic powerhouse of Europe, which Germany is, you know, a fantastic job that it has done in the whole of that manufacturing space, has made the sort of shambles of its energy policy that you would, dare I say, expect for a third world country, you know, and it's going to have ramifications right around the piece, this.
And coming back home, of course, it's interesting to think that Nicola Sturgeon, to maintain her majority in Scotland, is, of course, in alliance with the Scottish Green Party. And that has seen an SNP who talked under Alex Salmond's leadership endlessly about the riches that would come from oil, that meant Scotland could be independent and rich. And now the political mood music in Edinburgh, and indeed, it's not terribly encouraging from Westminster either, has led to that big Cambo oil field project being scrapped. I can't see Sturgeon necessarily changing her mind quickly, but do you, with all your political experience and knowledge of people in politics in London, do you think the atmosphere is right now for a different debate, perhaps about gas extraction, perhaps even about the North Sea?
Yes, I think it is right for a real change of view, and to some extent some quick changes of view. I have noticed that within the political environment, the discussion about, you know, alternatives are best and we need that, all that sort of thing, that seems to have really quietened down. I wouldn't bank on Nicola Sturgeon to do anything other, Nigel, than stand on some sort of public platform and say that the English have a right to keep Scotland supplied with energy, you know, just like we're supposed to be paying their pensions if they go off and do their own thing. You know, I mean, she does that. I think there's something where she says they want to keep on testing, so we've got to pay for their testing. Well, frankly, it's kind of nuts to that. You know, we live in the real world, and she may stand on platforms, but that isn't the real world. The real world says that right now we've got to do everything we can to extract whatever we can in way of gas out of the North Sea. Yeah. And when you look at the price, that does mean that some of those wells which have not been particularly economic must now be economic. It must be well worth the while as well to get more gas out of some of the declining wells. I mean, it's more complicated business. It costs more money, but you can do it now. And if she won't grant drilling licenses, then we've got to grant drilling licenses. We have to do that. We need more gas during this transition. The focus has never been on transition. And if you say that something good comes out of every crisis, realism about energy is going to come out of this one.
Angela Knight, thank you very much indeed. Final word, Liam Halligan, your ear pretty close to the ground in Westminster. We've got the Net Zero group in Parliament, about 30, 40 Conservative MPs.
And some Labour MPs.
And some Labour
From
MPs.
all parts of the Tory party.
Does this start to grow?
I think Boris Johnson now is under enormous pressure. I think Angela Knight, former Treasury Minister, of course, she knows her way around.
Spoke very strongly about it.
She did. Power, and I think she's exactly right. Look, it's not just household energy bills that are about to spike in April, up by 54%, according to the Ofgem price cap, and that's the average. That's the average. Yeah. It's business energy bills. It's those energy-intensive firms in red wall seats that employ lots of people, that have lots of dependents. They are the bread and butter, the livelihood of many, many households that Boris Johnson needs to carry in these May elections, let alone future general elections, if he makes it. So I think we are going to see some serious U-turns. I think the Treasury is already making noises. The business ministry is making noises about granting more North Sea licenses. I mean, hold on to your hats, Nigel. We could even see, I would say, I wouldn't rule this out, a reversal of that moratorium on fracking quite soon.
It'll need some pressure, but I think the wind has changed.